research on the Griffins, and that's the wine, eh? And discovered that some of the Griffin boys served in the Peloponnesian War, fighting with the Spartans as Irish mercenaries. Now, if you believe that, I was just trying to keep you from falling asleep. Just kidding, but truthfully, my great-great-grandfather, Thomas Griffin, came to Canada from Ireland in the early 1820s and was granted a tract of land as a tenant farmer in what is now known as Shannon, just north of Quebec City. So 5 generations of Griffins worked the farms, but my father as a young man could not stay on the farm because his older brother inherited the farm. My mom was French-Canadian, so my dad, who was working away from the farm, met my mom and they eventually got married, moved to Quebec City, and raised their kids there. We were a working class family. My parents raised 8 kids, and we lived in a series of flats, apartments, and walk-ups over the years. In one of the flats where we lived, there were 11 of us. There were 2 bedrooms. Think about that for a minute. My father's sister, my Aunt Maggie, also lived with us. As a child, I slept in a large bed with 4 of my siblings, 3 of whom were bedwetters. Needless to say, I learned to swim at a very early age. My mother used to ask me, what part of the bed would you like to sleep in? I'd say, keep me out of the deep end. But of course, it was very nice in the morning when the sun shone in. There was a beautiful rainbow over the bed. My brothers and I were educated at St. Patrick's High School, and my 3 sisters at Leonard School here in Quebec City. The girls had their own school then. It was our version of the separate school system. When I graduated from high school, my father was disabled at that time, and I had 4 siblings younger than I, so I went out and got a job to help my mother with the expenses of the house, just like my older brother had done. I got a job in the office of a foundation garment manufacturing company, manufacturing women's undergarments. We lived off the fat of the land. We held women in when they went out. I used to tell my friends that I worked for Canada Packers. One of my hobbies at that time was playing guitar and singing folk music, which was very popular in the 60s. A friend of mine and I auditioned in the United States and were hired by the University of Minnesota to tour the Midwestern states doing concerts for their kids in elementary and high schools. I did that for about a year and then decided to become a teacher. I went to Teachers College here in Quebec City, a school called St. Joseph's Teachers College. I met Helen in Teachers College, my beautiful wife Helen. We were both teaching later in Saint Laurent, near Montreal, and we decided to get married. On the morning of our wedding day, Helen broke her glasses, so she had to be led down the aisle by her seeing-eye father. The priest who officiated at the wedding was a Hungarian, very uncertain of his English. I reminded him after the ceremony that he had married himself. Of course, it didn't help when Helen tried to put my wedding ring on his finger. So in our volatile moments, Helen has always reminded me that she could easily have had our marriage dissolved for two reasons. Number one, she couldn't see what she was doing. Secondly, she couldn't understand what the priest was saying. On the day of the... You're wondering, what the hell is this about this book or what? On the day of our first child was born, our day of first child, I called up the hospital. I was very nervous and told them that Helen's water had broken. "Don't panic," the nurse said. "Is this her first child?" I said, "No, this is her husband." We eventually had 4 children, 3 boys and a girl. We now have 11 grandchildren. So my wife Helen and I are a blend of Irish, English, French-Canadian genealogy. So that's the background against which I decided to write the novel, 3 Letters to Pine River. It's really a story of the murder of my father's uncle, a crime committed by a man named Michael Farrell. The killing was actually Michael Farrell's second killing. As a result of these crimes, Michael Farrell was hanged in Quebec City in January of 1879. It was the last public hanging in Quebec City. Some of you may know that people were invited to these hangings. As a matter of fact, some cities in Ontario would use a public hanging as a tourist attraction. Try to get the people to come. I had heard many times in my visits to Shannon as a young lad the stories about this mythical-like figure who had committed these terrible crimes. But I had never been told the real story of the events. So it was quite by accident that I came across the newspaper reports of these murders and the trial that followed, as reported by the archives of the Quebec Chronicle-Telegraph. My own grandfather testified at the murder of Michael Farrell, at the trial of Michael Farrell. I have often wondered why my father never mentioned these happenings to us, because amazingly he did not. I suppose there is a trait in the Irish personality that precludes fathers from relating bad news about their own families. So I have fictionalized the events of this story, changed the names and places, and moved everything up to the 1950s. I did this because as a teenager I was a frequent visitor to Shannon and felt that I could talk about the people and the lives of the farmers, being very familiar with their way of life, and also to talk about the influence of the Valcartier military facility close by. So, 3 Letters to Pine River is also the story of a young fellow who gets involved in all of these events, and very reluctantly has to be a witness at the trial of the murderer. This is not really a mystery, it's a real